Tech Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
I do, I got a mic. Is it on? You guys hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Hi everybody, I'm Scott Case, and as Frank said, I'm the CEO of the Startup America Partnership. Really excited to be here to talk about relationships. But I actually am going to talk about sex, gambling, and luck. Okay? But before I do that, who here wants to get lucky? Raise your hand if you want to get lucky. That's what I thought. Okay, everybody here was given a number. Find your number. Hurry up. Let's go. Find your number. It's really important. Okay, my lackeys, my entourage, stand up with your numbers, please. Okay, the lackeys and the entourage, they have a number. Get up and go sit where they're standing. Change all your seats. Why? Because this is about networking. Find somebody new. Get your asses out of your seats and shift it up. Hurry up, let's go. Simon says, Scott says, sit down. All right. That's enough. You're going to have lots of opportunity to talk later, okay? All right. Sex, gambling, luck. I got your attention again. It's amazing. You just say sex and everybody goes. Okay, so sex, gambling, and luck. All right, so the first thing I wanted to do is to set the expectation that what creating relationships about, especially in an environment like this, is actually talking to people you don't already know. So hopefully you're all sitting next to somebody you don't already know. Okay? Your job tonight is to try to meet at least 3 people that you don't already know, and I don't count. So if you come talk to me, I'm going to send you off to go find somebody else. Okay? You need to create a strong network around you. Okay, so I said I would talk about sex, gambling, and luck. So I'm going to tell you a story about sex, gambling, and luck, and it's all about me, which is one of my favorite topics. In all seriousness, so sex, gambling, and luck. I was a freshman in college, very beautiful woman, moved onto my floor. I had seen her at my freshman orientation. And I saw that she was moving on the floor. I went down to see her at lunch, and she was sitting by herself. And I sat down across from her at lunch and said, you probably don't remember me from freshman orientation. And she said, oh yeah, I remember you. And I said, well, I live on the same floor as you, and I introduced myself. Her name was Leslie. And I'll fast forward. It turns out that Leslie became my wife. So, but as much as that, and it was really important, she's like 4 children later. She's a very tolerant woman, as you can clearly tell. But what makes this story important is that you probably figured out that's the sex part of the story, right? 4 children. So we're going to quickly move to the gambling part. So it turns out that my father-in-law, my wife's dad, and we weren't married at the time when I first learned this, he's a horse handicapper. And for those of you guys who've tracked the Triple Crown, what horse handicappers do is they figure out which horses have the best chances to win different races. Not only that, but he's been a lifelong, I guess he's a pursuer of luck and a mathematician, really super wicked smart guy. And he taught me everything that I know about casino games and playing horses. Okay, and so I know all the odds for games like blackjack. I know which games in the casino are the worst. You know that big wheel? Okay, 18% big goes to the house. Never play the big wheel. Bad deal. Poker, playing against the other idiots at the table, not the house. Good game. Okay? Horse playing, challenging, but it's a lot like picking great companies. You have to find the horse that's going to give you the best payout. There's a lot of challenges that are based in there. But what was important about me meeting Leslie's dad was that I also had a friend of mine. His name was Ira. Actually, my friend's name's Andy. His father's name was Ira. And Ira also played the horses. And when I was in college, I would have these great conversations with him about horse playing and gambling and the things that I had learned about that and things that I was doing. And I was building companies at the same time. As you probably tell, I'm a little ADD, so I tend to do a lot of things at the same time. But what my introduction to Ira did was I had a great relationship with him. He happened to be a buddy of mine's dad. But I started to create a relationship with him, a common interest. So a few years went by. I started a company in college. I had an exit. It wasn't really an economic win, but it was a success nonetheless because the company continued on. In fact, the software we developed is actually still available today. It was a flight simulation product that would help pilots fly on instruments in the clouds, PC-based simulations. So I had exited this company, and I told my buddy Andy that I was going to move out to the West Coast. I've spent my entire life thinking I lived on the wrong coast. Turns out I actually lived on the right coast, like you guys. So I thought I lived on the wrong coast. I was heading out to the West Coast. I got a call from Andy's dad. He said, "Don't go. Before you go, I want you to meet somebody." I trusted him. I had a relationship with him. He said, "You've learned a lot of different things. We've had long conversations. I want you to meet this guy." Well, who he introduced me to is a guy named Jay Walker. And Jay, as you may know, is the founder of Priceline.com. But at the time, he was another entrepreneur that I had met. Okay. We seem to be all right now. And Jay was hiring people to work at Walker Digital, which was the intellectual property firm and the kind of business development firm that he was starting. I was the 4th employee there. And it turned out that Ira was the 2nd employee there. And it brought me in to interview with Jay. And over a course of about 2 hours, and I don't think we knew it at the time because we hadn't really invented the underpinnings of Priceline yet. But oddly enough, one of his first questions, when we were going through the end of the interview process, and he said, "Look, I'd really like you to join the team." And I said, "Well, kind of what's the compensation?" He said, "Well, why don't you tell me what you think your compensation should be?" So we didn't know it at the time, but those were the early underpinnings of what would ultimately become Priceline, where you have to name your own price for stuff. And it turns out that naming your own compensation when you're 25 is a really hard thing to do. Like, I sweated this whole thing out. Nonetheless, I joined, and what ultimately became was Priceline. And my point telling you that story is that it involves sex and gambling and luck. But it's the luck part. Because if you want to get lucky, it's not really about getting lucky. It's about positioning yourself to be in the right places, to have the right relationships and the right opportunities. And that's really the thrust of what I want to talk about with all of you tonight. And the reason I mixed everybody up at the beginning of this conversation. So for me, one of the things that I see as it relates to startups, that is, if it's not the biggest challenge, it's one of the biggest challenges, is that founders tend to spend an enormous amount of their time doing product development. They have an idea, they have a solution, and increasingly, thanks to folks like Steve Blank and Eric Ries and others, we've gotten better at thinking about customer development, finding people to validate way before we start building too much stuff. And almost one of the things that's really great about starting a company today is also one of the greatest challenges. We have really inexpensive access to loads of technology. And it's really easy to just start building stuff. Can I say shit? Building shit. Okay? And the problem is it's actually shit. You haven't actually validated anything. You haven't talked to really anybody. You had this idea, you saw a problem, you figured it out. We've got to do a much better job there. But the thing that I see as I travel across the country over and over and over again is a lack of network development. A lack of founders building a community around their idea at the very beginning. And what you see with successful founders is that successful founders, or founders of successful companies, they tend to have a very strong network around them. Not always, just like anything, there's anomalies, there's outliers. But if you really study the folks, they come from an industry, they have domain knowledge, they have a network that they bring to the table. Average startup founder is about 40 years old. They've tended to work for a long time before they got into this game. So you've got to build a strong network around the idea in the business. And you've got to do it early. And you've got to keep it current. Because the problems that you think you have are actually symptoms of that network. Okay? So how many people here are founders of a company, starting a company right now? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, so half the room. Okay? How many of you think that all you need is some money? If you just had capital, all your problems would go away? Okay? Right. Those people who raised their hands before, you're all liars. You just knew I was setting you up. Access to capital is entirely a function of the relationships you've developed through the process of building your company. Entirely. There are very few companies where a founder of a company walked into a potential funder or investor, told their story about their investor, and got a check when they walked out. Very, very few. Again, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's just the same as you having I'll have another in the Kentucky Derby. Take 20 horses. You had a 1 in 20 shot like anybody else. So you've got to do that. The same with talent. I hear over and over again from startups, oh, I can't find great people. Can't find engineers. I can't find this. And yet I'll find other startups are like, yeah, I just hired 20 engineers in the last quarter. Same market, same kinds of engineers they were looking for. Why? One had developed a long-term, robust network and able to navigate that network. The other hadn't yet, or hadn't focused and spent time on it. You've got to create those connections. And it's more than just a set of go and change cards. You actually have to build a relationship with people, and I'll give you some rules for creating a relationship at the end here. But the challenge is that if you've got to get to talent, or you've got to get to customers, or you've got to get to capital, or you want to create strategic partnerships, you have to lay the groundwork and build those communities all along the way. So it's really, really important that you build those networks, and it's not that hard. Part of my story about meeting my wife was remembering that I had met her at that orientation and recognizing her and reintroducing myself to her. And whether she liked me or didn't like me, the relationship turned into something that none of us could have predicted. But more importantly, me meeting her dad and then meeting my friend's dad and communicating and finding things that were common. And that's happened throughout my whole life. It will happen through what you do, but you've got to be intentional about it when you're building your company. So one of the things that we're doing at Startup America is to try to make it a little bit easier for you. One of the challenges that you have when you're trying to build a network is finding and basically increasing the serendipity. How do you make sure you're at events where the chances of you intersecting with people that have common interests and are interesting to each other are there? So the fact that half the room raised their hand and started as founders, that's a really important group if you're starting to found a company. Because believe it or not, peer mentoring and peer networks are super valuable. Great to have people who have been there, done that, but having people who are doing it right now and maybe facing the same challenges as you, it's way easier to brainstorm a solution to a problem with other people who are facing that problem than it is to do it on your own or to try to tee somebody else up. So finding ways to be able to create those opportunities is something that we're doing at Startup America. So right now when you join Startup America, which is totally free, simply go to s.co, and I think we have it up there, s.co. You can join, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything. That's the other part of saying it's free. Did I mention it's free? The hardest thing about it is remembering your employer identification number, which who remembers that? Join, and you get access to a network of startups all across the country. About 7,500 startups right now are members. Every state, every territory. In some states like California, it's 1,000. In places like DC, Maryland, and Virginia, it's almost 1,000 in that whole region. All companies that you can now have visibility with. There's a community on LinkedIn. We're soon going to migrate that to a new platform where you're able to connect with all those people. And they're all in the same business that you are as a startup. We've also partnered with almost 100 companies to create deals that help you cut your costs and grow your business, from companies like American Airlines, American Express, LinkedIn, Google, Microsoft, Intuit, Dell, and even a partnership with the New York Stock Exchange, which by the end of next month is going to open up literally to hundreds of major corporations that could be your first reference customers. But you've got to get in and create the connections and the relationships there. And then finally, we've created and partnered with serial entrepreneurs all over the country. There's a startup DC, there's a startup Maryland, there's a startup Virginia, there's a startup Colorado, there's a startup Tennessee, there's a startup California that'll be launching soon. There's about 22 or 23 of them that have launched so far. This now gives you access to whole communities of startups, not just the ones that are here, but a network of networks all across the country, which is really the objective of what Startup America is trying to do. What we want to do is to elevate the startup economy to its proper place. We've been natural athletes as startups in America all along. We just haven't really focused on it and invested in it to make it happen. So what we've tried to do is, there you go. I got one person to clap. I think you should stand up and clap for everybody to get them to clap, don't you? There you go. Come on. Give her a round of applause, if not me. So look, you're a part of that, but your role in creating that network, that high network density, you have to do that, right? And a lot of people say, I'm going to move to the Valley, and they have a great network there. You still have to plug in and contribute to it. You don't get to just walk into a Starbucks and pitch your idea and have somebody write you a check. It doesn't work that way there either. It is about creating that network. So you can do it around your existing business right now. And you've got to build it and spend your time and energy on it. All right, so the last thing I said I would do is I gave 7 numbers out. The numbers were 1 through 7. So I have a list of 7 things that you guys should do. And since I couldn't remember all 7 of them, I wrote them down. So, number 1, think about creating a relationship is that everybody has a story. And so your job when you're starting to have a conversation with somebody is understand what their story's about. What are they interested in? What are they doing with themselves? And you've got to tease that out. Don't up and level. I'm Scott Cates and I'm doing awesome stuff. Okay? Which brings me to my second rule. It's not about you, even though I said it was really about me. But it's not about you. It's about them. Okay? Your job is to figure out more about the other person that you can create a relationship with and figure out where in that scheme. Do you have a bunch of stuff in common or you don't have things in common? You can almost find something in common with any human being, right? We all have to wake up in the morning, put our pants or dresses or whatever it is we're going to wear to work, or in the case of Frank, sometimes nothing. That's another story. But we all have the same kinds of things. So find something that's not about you. What are their interests and figure out if they align with you or not. This one's kind of tricky, although I've only found it to be interesting in my life. Find a way to say yes when people ask you for something. They ask you for an introduction. They ask you for advice. They ask you for your opinion. Find a way to say yes. All the most interesting things in my life have started with me saying yes to something and not being speculative about it. Not knowing what was going to happen, but being committed to the idea that something amazing would happen if I just committed to it. And you'll find yourself sort of almost falling forward and running ahead. And what that does is it builds sort of a mechanism for reciprocity. The ability for you to say yes gives you the opportunity to create an opportunity later for someone else to be able to help you. And as human beings, that's a very, very powerful impulse. It's very hard to say no to somebody when they've said yes to you. Okay? But it also is an opportunity for you to give of your expertise and of yourself. All right, that's number 3. Number 4, it's going to sound a little antithetical, but you can prune a little bit. There are relationships where you're just not going to have anything in common. You're not going to have anything that's going to be an obvious way that you can help each other. It's okay to sort of let those drift or put them out into deep orbit. Right? Just let them sit out there. Number 5, LinkedIn, Facebook, email, whatever the technology of choices you might be using to stay connected. They aren't a replacement for in-person, hand-to-hand, look people in the eye, create a relationship with them. You can't replace them. So when you connect with me on LinkedIn, and I haven't met you, and you're all welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, and then you email me and say, hey, would you be willing to introduce me to Frank? I see that you're connected to him on LinkedIn. If I don't have any reference point for you, I'm unlikely to want to do that, no matter what our relationships are online. But if I've even met you once, I'm very likely to. Okay? So you've got to use these tools for the 6th principle here, which is they're really great for keeping your relationships current. Okay? And currency is really important. It's not enough to say, hey, remember 6 months ago I met you and I gave you that pitch? I talked to you about this idea I was working on, or I shared with you, or I did an introduction to you. It's not enough to do that. You've got to find ways, and that's where LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and other tools can allow you to share what you have going on with others and keep them current along the way. Maybe it's a quick email. Maybe it's an article you saw something about that was interesting to that person from your conversations with them. And you follow up with them, by the way, can we get coffee at some point? Or I'd love to share something more with you. And then the final thing that I'll share with you is you got to be intentional about all of this. So I mentioned sort of one of the traps that I think, oh, the air conditioning went off. That was pleasant. One of the traps that startups fall into is this product development trap. They're so focused on their heads about getting the product done. Be intentional about this network piece. Be thoughtful about it. Allocate time and energy to it in a pretty specific way. And you'll find that you can meet people almost anywhere, and it's shocking to me all the times where you'll run into somebody in an unexpected place, but the relationship will develop with time and be incredibly valuable to you, but more importantly, you can be incredibly valuable to them. So that's kind of my tips and tricks, a little bit of story of my sex and gambling and luck. The whole point of creating that network around you is that luck doesn't just happen. You create that lucky opportunity, that lucky relationship is what will lead you to those opportunities. And maybe others will say, oh, you really got lucky, you're in the right place at the right time. But most of the time it's through hard work and being intentional about this stuff. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.